Welcome to Chapbooks 101.2. We are so excited to have this panel joining us. I will let them all introduce themselves, but first I'm going to show a short video for thanking our sponsors. And bear with me as I share my screen.
My name is Paul Ramos. I'm a MA, Medical Assistant PCS2, and I've been in a company for 5 years. I choose to work in AHF to carry the heart and soul for my dad, my late dad. He was diagnosed with HIV and AIDS. Every time I see a patient, I know that he's looking over me and he knows that I did it for him.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Zoraida Jiménez y soy la manager de práctica de la oficina de Falls Church in Virginia. So what has surprised me more about the company culture is my immediate manager taking her time to really train me one-on-one, making sure that I understand and I do the job that I need to do to succeed in my role.
Hi, my name is Simply Sandy. I'm a non-medical case manager here at the K Street location. I chose to work at AHF because it is a phenomenal company. The company allowed me to spread my wings, if you will. They allowed me to continue doing what I love to do, and that's serving the public. I feel as though we are a family, and I could not do what I do by myself.
My name is Dominita Morrow. I'm the office administrator for the Temple Hills AHF location. I choose to work for AHF because I like to give back to my community. My favorite thing about working with AHF is how much the organization gives to the community, how they help our patients, help them grow, the tools that they give them that our patients can't find at any other clinic.
The thing that surprised me about working for AHF, which I enjoyed, the teamwork, the employees, it's a really great work environment. You look forward to actually getting up and coming to work. AHF is one of those companies that I will say that really looks out and really cares about their employees.
My name is Sade. I'm a technician here in Baltimore, and I work with AHF because I really enjoy taking care of my patients, and I like their mission statement of being patient first, of putting patient care over profit, and getting our co-pays as close to zero as possible. I love that part.
Hi, everyone. I'm having trouble unsharing my screen. If you want to try sharing, it might turn off.
Says host disabled participant screen share.
Okay, I'm just going to leave the meeting and hopefully it doesn't close it for y'all.
Okay, hello y'all.
Hello.
Welcome to Chapbooks 101.2.
Woo!
You're excited to do Chapbooks 101 at OutWrite in 2019. It's very well received, and I'm honored to have one repeat panelist return and have new panelists take part as well. I'm Gregg Shapiro, and I'm going to ask my wonderful panelists to just say a couple of words of an introduction for themselves. Dustin, you want to go first?
Hi, I'm Dustin Brookshire, author of the Chapbooks Love Most of You Too and To the One Who Raped Me, and the forthcoming Dolly Parton Poetry Anthology from Madville Publishing with Julie E. Blomeke.
Kim Roberts?
Yeah, I have published I have 6 books of poems, and I have edited a couple of anthologies, most recently by Broad Potomac Shore, and also wrote a literary guide to Washington, D.C. So I do, I'm a literary historian as well as being a poet.
Great. Regie Cabico?
Hey everyone, greetings from Washington, D.C. My name is Regie Cabico. I am a poet, a theater artist, and an arts educator. My roots began at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe as a poet in the spoken word poetry slam genre. Over the decades, I've been published through Chapbooks. I'm also publisher of Capturing Fire Press and producer of Capturing Fire International Spoken Word Slam.
Thank you. Allison Blevins?
Hi, I am Allison Blevins. I'm the author of 2 full-length collections, and I have 1 forthcoming and 4 chapbooks and another forthcoming next year. Also the director of Small Harbor Publishing. We have a press, Harbor Editions, Harbor Anthologies, and Harbor Review, which is an online magazine.
Dan Vera?
Hi, I'm Dan Vera, coming from Washington, D.C. I'm a writer and editor and have published, in the count, I guess for about 15 years now, have published off and on different books through presses, local-based presses, and also micro presses, including Gregg Shapiro and Kim Roberts, and many other wonderful poets. I was on Chapbook 101, so looking forward to the continuation where we left off. So,
Thank you very much. So Merriam-Webster defines a chapbook as, quote, a small book containing ballads, poems, tales, or tracts, end quote. Are all panelists in agreement on that definition?
I want to challenge that because, yes, this is a chapbook by a visual artist, Chantel Martin, at the Whitney Museum. So it looks like a traditional chapbook, but it has images. So I feel that with a chapbook, it has maybe visual art can also, and if we think of poetry and the visual, then this is like a chapbook.
Excellent. Okay, great. I want to begin by asking the panelists, what was the first chapbook by a queer writer each of you ever encountered? And if you have it or any others nearby you want to share, please do so. Let's start with Dustin.
It's funny, I thought about this and I was like, when did I first get exposed? And it was actually in an intro to creative writing class more years ago than I would like to count back, thanks to Beth Gillis. But I actually couldn't remember the first book, but I remembered, and it's on my shelf, Carcass by Mark Ward, the first international, someone from another country's chapbook that I remember looking at, and that's what came to mind. And he is a very great poet, and he also runs a magazine to give Impossible Archetype a plug.
Great. Kim Roberts?
Yeah, well, I first started buying poetry books in the 1970s, and that was a time when there was this whole explosion of print culture and a lot of do-it-yourself, and there was just this explosion of small presses. Some of the books were just mimeographed or copied. So I started finding chapbooks almost immediately as soon as I started reading poetry. But I do have an early favorite that I wanted to hold up, which is Audre Lorde's From a Land Where Other People Live, which came out from Broadside Press. Broadside was one of these small presses out of Detroit that just did amazing work. So that was a sort of early inspiration for me.
Great. Regie?
Well, my poetry journey began in 1993, and I remember Joan Larkin and Michael Lascelles' landmark anthology, Gay and Lesbian Poets of Our Time, and I decided to get a book from every author in the book. And oh gosh, what was the gay bookstore in Boston? Yes, I think, yes. And so I found a book by Paul Mariah, and it was just, when you find a chapbook like that, it's so thin and it's like, oh, it's between something and it's right there. So I remember getting that book. I wish I could show it, but all my books are in boxes. So that's what I remember.
Allison?
I think you asked this question at Saints and Sinners, and I was like, oh, I don't know. And so then I've really been thinking about it a lot, and I was exposed to chapbooks during my MFA, and I really thought I hadn't read any. And so then giving it more and more thought, the first chapbook I ever read was Watching the Contortionists by Laura Lee Washburn. And she was my teacher and mentor in my MA program. And I think the reason I never could remember having read it is because chapbooks just were not on my radar. I just thought, oh, that's not a thing. It's not interesting. I want to publish books. Obviously I've changed my mind, but I didn't think about them as much when I first started writing.
Okay, Dan?
Yeah, it was early 90s. I was living in the Northwest and convinced a friend to help drive out with me to Port Townsend for the day, and kind of had this memory that James Broughton lived in Port Townsend, great beat adjacent queer radical fairy poet, filmmaker, brilliant avant-garde filmmaker. And we managed to find his house, and then I chickened out knocking on his door, and I just left a note in his mailbox. And about a couple of weeks later, I received this envelope in the mail with this, what I now know, or knew later, was a chapbook. This amazing little going on, what Regie, what you were saying about Paul Mariah, is this little invitation of a book, almost it almost felt like a personal message. And it just, amazed me to no end. I was searching for it and wasn't able to find it to sort of show it to you, but it, that stays with me, and kind of led to sort of collecting other works. So,
well, my first chapbook was actually by someone I would say is queer adjacent. and that's Patti Smith. Come on, you guys. That'll work, right? This is Ha Ha Houdini by Patti Smith from 76, 77. And then I was also really lucky to find a copy when I lived in DC of
Hi there.
Jim Douglas's Hi There from the early to mid 70s. So these are two really fabulous ones. Douglas is DLUGOS.
Greg, what press was the Dugos from? I was trying to remember.
That's Some of Us Press.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
From Washington, D.C., of course. Absolutely.
Right. And they published just a ton of queer authors, and for many of them, it was their first books. And then they went on to have these incredible careers after that. But that's what I'm talking about, that small press explosion of the 1970s. I think Soup or Some of Us Press is just a fabulous example of that kind of fervor around this. And it was all because, the technology had changed.
They also did Ed Cox, the late Ed Cox, and they did Terrence Winch too. So really cool DC representation. Do you each have a favorite chapbook by an LGBTQ writer?
Yeah.
Jump in whenever you'd like.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in because I found a bunch on my shelves that one of the things that I love about chapbooks is that people can do weird little projects, specific projects with them. So I love the series from Hanuman Press. They're tiny. This is one by Eileen Miles called 1969 that I particularly love. And they're just such sweet little objects in the hand. For a while, Maureen Thorson was doing big game books, and she made book objects. They were all handmade. This is David Trinidad's Tiny Moon Notebook. And you open up the little case and you take out the chapbook that's inside, and there's illustrations, and it all opens up into anyway, I love that. I was really glad what Regie said about the books being visual. I love it when a chapbook has a really specific focus. Oftentimes they're just one long poem, or they're a series of connected poems. And I also really like those sort of weird format ones.
Anybody else? I'm going to hold this up. Another DC writer.
Richard McCann.
Someone that we miss terribly. But this is his chapbook from the mid-90s, nights of 1990, and it's quite beautiful, and we miss it.
I'll jump in.
Okay.
Brian Borland's Tourist. I love a book that carries its art over on both sides. And he has a quote at the end talking about why he picked it. It's from Adrienne Rich's 1997 quote in refusing the National Medal of Arts. And she says, "Art means nothing if it simply decorates the dinner table of the power which holds its hostage." And the poems are amazing in this book.
Wow. Well, I'm really glad we were talking about Some of Us Press and presses. So I'd like to actually see if Dan and Allison and Regie can say a little something about the process of creating a chapbook press.
I can go first, I guess, since you said my name first, I guess. The first press I started with another DC writer, neighbor, friend, Michael Gouju, was called Verju initially, this kind of sort of combined word of both of our names. And we'd run a local poetry reading series for a number of years, about 9 years total. But anyway, we were into it a couple of years, and we invited poets to come read and really loved their work. And we're just kind of stunned to discover they didn't have like current books. You know, that basically was, I mean, it really kind of started from this kind of like, wow, we really love this poet's work. And we'd asked, you could bring your latest book, and anyway, and so we had the good fortune to have two poets. And I remember we were sitting over dinner one night and we said, well, how hard is it to put out a book? Like we should just, we had no idea what we were getting into, but we said, wow, we should do it. Let's just do it, and Michael also shares this kind of love of books and physical culture, and I just love books and just the visual aspect of it. And so we reached out to two of those poets, and the first two poets we reached out to, one is on the panel, Kim Roberts. We reached out to Kim and asked if she had any, we were going into this, again, being very honest about not knowing what we were doing. And she had this great talk about, Kim just mentioned, these manuscripts that are a little difficult to place sometimes because they're sort of conceptually like, they're curious, they're really beautifully written, but most big presses just don't know how to handle them. And so we were lucky enough to, the first two books we published, actually, all the books we published, we've been really, you have to love what you're publishing because you're actually devoting a lot of time and energy with really no recompense, really. It's about kind of really getting that work out there. And the two manuscripts, it was Kim Roberts, this is her book, The Kim Nama, and More Than Anything, which is by Hiram LaRue, Maryland poet. Two queer poets, as it turned out. So, when I said that was 2007, and learned as we went. And then the third book we published was by this fantastic Midwestern, I don't know how many of y'all, for John Gilgan, this poetry teacher, professor living in the Midwest, who sometime in the early internet years was sending out a poem a day. People would just basically get an email from him. This is pre-Facebook, pre-everything. And they were queer poems. They were just really explicitly out there, but beautifully crafted. And we reached out to him. He was sort of retired, and we just said, we want to do something with this, make sure that it lasts in some way. And so the book we put out of his was The Dailies, which is just, it's, and then Carol Guest was our fourth poet. So they've all been, we didn't really set out to basically be queer press, and we don't define ourselves. Michael is an ally, but it's just been really about sort of kind of learning how we do that. And again, I think what allowed us to do that was the onset of print on demand and being able to figure out how to do that, and also think about economic models that, knowing that we weren't doing this as kind of like a business enterprise to make money off of it. Finding out, hopefully we'll be able to talk about that at some point, but really finding models that basically put, the gains of the books in the poet's hands, anyway, but that's really kind of how we started out. And we, yeah.
Thank you. Allison?
Yeah, I want to echo that Harbor Editions started very similarly, that the magazine was running a micro chapbook contest, and it was 10 poems, and we'd done it a couple of times, and each time there'd be these 4 or 5 finalists who were unbelievable, and it was just agony not to put their work out. And of course I always need something else to do, so I said, well, I'll just start a press. That's easy. like Dan said. And so I reached out to Sarah Fraley. She was our first, and then queer poet July Westhale and her Bright News Gladiolas. That was our second book. And they had been finalists, and I had just loved their work, and I said, will you kind of do this thing with me? And they were so willing to let me really mess it up pretty badly along the way while I figured it out. And eventually we've had some amazing queer poets like Dustin, and this amazing book by Boston Gordon called Glory Holes. And my going into it was that I wanted to have a press. We are very intentionally seeking out work that was marginalized, and we know we have a whole series just for marginalized writers, and gender equity was really important to us as well. So we just felt like there's all of this amazing work, especially by people who weren't getting the platforms that they deserved, that was just being overlooked, stuff that was weird, stuff that was hybrid. We published a lot of stuff with images and drawings and photographs, and this book that just came out, the Creation Museum, is essay, photographs, poetry, just things that didn't quite fit other places. And I think that's a beautiful thing about chapbooks, is that they can finally find a home.
Definitely. Regie?
Okay, so chapbooks for me were an evolution of performing at colleges and needing something to sell. So in the 90s, I would be at the copy machine, like cutting photos, putting them on paper. I don't have the full chapbook. And I call this Cabico-ism press, 2001. So I would just staple it and sell it for $5, and it would just go out. So for me, the chapbook was sort of a necessity of having a product to sell. When Capturing Fire started more than a decade ago, I had never wanted to be a publisher, but I saw the community of queer poets and felt we need to sort of document these voices. So who's going to do it? How are we going to do it? And it just evolved. After close to 10 years, I worked with Sasha Sinclair to design the books, and it grew from there. So while we have published an anthology, and we've published local authors like Micah Powell, Micah the Poet, we have also done chapbooks. Jerica Escoto, a Filipino poet who now lives on the West Coast, we were doing a tour together. So we did this chapbook, and it was fun doing the visual art for this. And we worked together, and it was so much fun.
Wow.
I had a crush with a young gay poet in Brooklyn, and I wrote a poem for him. And this was my artwork. So I think falling in love and poetry, I stitched this. So there was something about making something that would just go out there. And
I'm glad you mentioned the stitching, because Ron Mooring from Southern Kitchens Press does these really beautiful, I actually watched him hand stitch my book. I was doing a reading in Columbus, Ohio. He came to the reading with his stitching kit and stitched books while I was doing the reading. So then, as from the poet's perspective, Dustin, Kim, Regie, Allison, with Poets of Chapbooks, can you say something about the process of actually creating what you would define as a chapbook manuscript, and how do you know that you have the poems necessary to make up a chapbook? We start with Dustin.
Yeah. So, you hear a lot of poets say like they don't write fiction because they don't have the attention span for it. I say I don't have a full length yet because I don't even have the attention span for a full length. I'm just in chapbook space. And for my first chapbook, To the One Who Wrote Me, it was easy in the sense of putting it together, not writing the poems, of course, given the topic, but it was a very, very clear theme. I knew what I wanted to do, put it together. With the second chapbook, it was really looking through what I had and what I felt really paired together. And I feel like that's super gay. That's what I like to call it. I call it my super gay chapbook. Allison would probably agree. It's picking what is that theme that really works, and how is that theme also deviated from. In a way, they still all make sense together. And I hope that I did that in my chapbook, weaving them in relationships, love, badass women have a big part in my chapbook, but then also just being super gay.
Great. Kim?
So I have a chapbook coming out next year, and it's a collaboration with a photographer, Rob Revere. And we started working together during the pandemic. He and I were both really missing going to museums. It's something that is just, it's a comfort, it's an inspiration, it's, and that was gone during a time when we really felt like we needed it. And so he started putting together all the all the photos he'd been taking over many years of people interacting with museums and artwork. And I wrote a long prose poem in 14 parts in response to his photos. And then we put that together. It was a great pandemic project. So that's called Corona Crown, and that's coming out next year. And then my most recent publication is this hand letterpress fold out called Choir, that comes from the Lost Press, a small press in Minnesota, and that's 5 queer love poems. So, for me, it's very much about having that cohesive theme. I think there are some groups of work that really sort of call for a smaller format. And so for me, it's very much not about like, oh, I don't have enough for a full-length manuscript, or, this is somehow lesser than a full-length manuscript. For me, it's all about finding the right package for a series. There are a lot of full-length books that are just sort of a miscellany of different themes, but in a chapbook, you can really just hone in a way that I think is very different than with a full-length book. And Allison, you know that because you've done that specifically too, right?
Yeah, how I started writing chapbooks was that I had this full-length book that I'd worked on from my MFA, and I was sending it out and always a bridesmaid, and it was just like I'd go back to it and I'd revise it, and it was just causing me so much agony. And I said, I have all these letters to Joan poems, because they're all ekphrastic based on the images or the paintings of Joan Mitchell. And I thought, that's a chapbook, that they don't belong in the book. Some of them ended up in the book later, but I turned it into a chapbook. And at about the same time, I was going through infertility and some, when I was pregnant, and I was, after the baby's born, I just said, I need to write about that. And I wrote about it, and I sent it to Ron Mooring, and he picked it up immediately. And that was my first, and then Letters to Joan got taken right after. And I went, that makes sense. I can do this. That chapbooks all of a sudden just were like, it's not easier, but it just made my brain go, this is how your brain works. And so from that moment on, I said, I'm going to write about this thing. And then I would know kind of before I started writing what the titles would be, where it was going to go. And then that's how my books now work. And I say that writing chapbooks taught me how to write a book, because that book I was sending out, it did get published eventually, but it's not how I think now. I mean, it's good work, but it's not, I didn't know how to write a book yet. And so working on those chapbooks gave me the framework in my brain to figure out how to do books.
I'm really glad you said that, because that is sort of, I think the description of this panel is that how chapbooks are often, right, a first step for so many writers. So thank you for mentioning that. And then Regie too, other than like having a crush, how else do you put together?
Well, I think with the chapbook, Kim was saying the unified theme, but the chapbook offers you just to be all over the place. And so for me, some of the chapbooks are all over the place. I wrote a really, really long poem. Sometimes in winter, poetry inspires a mango tree to blossom in Brooklyn. This is my artwork, by the way. And I think what Allison was saying, it allows me to sort of see it in finality and to see how it lays out in this format, what the line breaks look like. And so that's another reason for making the chapbook, was to have the visual presentation of what does this look like, what does it mean? So
Dan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just I agree with all that. I did slightly want to push back on the idea of, I mean, there seems to be this conception of the chapbook as a step up to, like a stepping stone to a full book. And that's true, I think, in many instances, but there's also a very long and rich tradition of very well-established poets. You know, I'm thinking people like Charles Wright, Dryad Press, publishing, in between kind of full-length books, these small collections that would later then be folded maybe into, and some that weren't. So there is this kind of, chapbooks can be sort of a place for a small meditation that doesn't fit into this kind of longer book. And so I guess I kind of feel compelled to say that because I hear that a lot. And so it's, well, I'm over chapbooks. I'm now writing books. And no, I mean, chapbooks, what I love about chapbooks is it can be really a place for real great experimentation and taking really big risks that you frankly just, you couldn't. I'm thinking Carol Guess's book. I remember she, and I'm blanking on the title. It was the fourth book we put out, and it was actually, she wrote it right after 9/11. She had ended a relationship with her then partner, and it was pretty brutal. And so it was this meditation of the end of that relationship in that period right after 9/11, and nobody wanted to touch it because it was double for two reasons: 9/11, then also very intense poetry about sort of the dissolution of this lesbian relationship, and it was just a dynamite collection. And so I think those, that's kind of chapbooks have those, serve that purpose, I think, in ways that full-length books sometimes just can't. So.
Yeah, I have more of my own questions, but I also see that there's some chat, so I should probably address that. Someone was asking if what is the difference, or is there a difference between a chapbook and a zine? Because Reggie was talking about going to like a copy machine, which in my mind is a zine, whereas again, I'm 100 years old, so this is coming from a really old person. A chapbook feels like it's like an officially sanctioned thing from a press. I'm probably wrong, but do you guys want to comment on that?
I think zines are just ephemeral, news pertinent of the moment now, drawing artwork. That's how I look at it. It's sort of like what I remember from Bamboo Girl in the 90s, Margarita Alcantara. It Asian feminist newsletter with visual, and it has sort of a punk rock, raw energy that's not polished like a chapbook. That's trying.
That's a good word. Polished. Yes, for sure.
But there's definitely overlap because, there are a lot of poets who write, they'll make sort of one of a kind objects as well, and I think of Bill Knott for years was making these homemade chapbooks. I have, I can show them off if I go over to my shelf. I have several of them, but I think that there's also something about that tradition that Regie had mentioned with spoken word writers often making just something, a few poems between a cover that you have something to sell at the end of your gigs. That's a whole tradition. So I think there's a lot of overlap in the zine and some of the chapbook stuff too.
But I also want to add that the zine, it has a title like a magazine. So this would be Cabicoism Zine, May 2022. And it has this where the zine press is on the top, and it's
got a recognizable name like Vanity Fair or Esquire or something. It's something you can go to. Whereas a chapbook, they're going to be different. Each title will be a different title.
Yeah.
So this is a question that can be answered by both the poet and the publishers, and that is, what do you look for when seeking a prospective publisher? And then for the publishers, what do you look for when seeking a prospective poet to publish or fiction writer to publish? And anybody wants to jump in, jump in.
I'll jump in. I always want to see who are they publishing. Like, do I think I relate or fit in some way? Because I'm not gonna submit my work to somebody that's publishing homophobes, right? So like, who are they publishing? What are they writing? But also, what's the quality of their products? So I like to order some of the books, more than one, just to see what's happening if those are available and inspect the quality and see how they hold up. And then also friend source, ask people that I know that maybe in publishing what was their experience, because I have had so many friends that have horror stories of interacting with publishers, and I would just give Allison a shout out because she is amazing to work with as a publisher, and it really felt like a partnership, and she will put up with 501 questions from you in separate emails and be patient the whole time.
And shout out to Dan too, excellent publisher. I'm sorry. All right, go ahead. Anybody else want to pick up that question?
Sure. When I'm looking for a publisher, I think all the things that Dustin said, and particularly now, is asking people, I think, is my most important, and maybe a quick just like Google search. I definitely had an experience where a book was picked up and I was new, my first one, and I ended up, rejecting after kind of figuring out a little bit more about the publisher. And now I know you definitely need to do some of that research before you just like send things out like a crazy person. In terms of publishing, I tend to know immediately that I must publish the book. So I'm the sort of publisher who we have a lot of readers, but I put my eyes on everything pretty much if I can, and I'll try to peek at stuff even as it comes in. And what has happened a lot of times, I think of Joan Kwan Glass's book, How to Make Pancakes for a Dead Boy. It came in and I just magically happened to kind of peek at it and went, holy crap, and emailed her right away, before the submission period had even closed, and said, I must have this. Sarah Rose Nordgren's book is very similar to that. And she sent two, and I said, I want them both. And she only gave me one. And it's such a bummer because somebody else took the other one. And I also think about people that I want to form relationships with. So Dustin, if he sends me something, I'm going to publish it likely. And I have people whose books I'm publishing, more of Shireen's book. This one is amazing. So I'm publishing another one of hers next year. So I think when we talked about it being cohesive. So I'm looking for something that really is on a theme. I love a themed book. I love a book that, tells a story. And I think all of our books I can't put down. I want a chapbook to be something that you read all at once, that you open it and you're like, this is so good, and you just devour it. And so far, all of the books that we've put out, I think are that. And so books I want to read are the things that I look for.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm going to grab another question from the chat. And I know that some of you also write prose as well as poetry. And the question was, speaking to how creating a chapbook would be beneficial to a fiction writer as well as to a poet. Is that a thing?
Oh, yeah. There are fiction and nonfiction chapbooks too.
Mm-hmm. We publish both at Harbor Edition. So we have several that are, short stories, memoir, things like that. And I think, so I write collaboratively with another queer poet, Josh Davis, and we have one book out, and with Ron, again, I cannot say enough good things about Seven Kitchens Press, a queer publisher. And then we have another one coming out next year. And what that has allowed us to do, the next book has a lot of epistolary work in it. So, prose. I think you can just like push. So for fiction writers and nonfiction writers, I think you can do you can have poetry, you can have all the things in a chapbook, and I love that about some of our fiction. It comes in and I think it's prose poetry, and then I talk to the author and they're like, no, that's fiction, and I'm like, I don't care what it is, I'm going to publish it.
Wow. Well, we only have like 2 minutes left. I'm just going to take this time to say thank you, Dustin Brookshire. Thank you, Kim Roberts. Thank you, Allison Blevins. Thank you, Dan Vera. Thank you, Regie Cabico. Thank you to Nicole and Rachel, the rock star interpreters, brava. And we're gonna just call it quits a little early because I don't want to be late. So thank you all. Virtual besos and abrazos, and take care and be well and be safe.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.